Hey everyone, welcome to the Darshan Talks live stream. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help you trust the products you depend on. Now, right now, with COVID being what it is, everyone's fully aware of how clinical research works. So this hopefully helps explain what that looks like at the clinical research level. As you know, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA-regulated products. So if you think about drugs, wonder about devices, consider cannabis or obsess over pharmacy, this is the podcast for you. Me and my guest today are both lawyers. However, neither one of us is giving clinical advice. I'm a pharmacist. I'm not giving you clinical advice either, and no legal advice, like we mentioned. And if my guest also is a bit of a regulatory expert, so she's not giving regulatory advice either. I do these podcasts because they're a lot of fun, and I find myself learning something new each time. But it would be great to know someone's listening. So if you like what you hear, please leave a comment, please subscribe. If you have questions, please ask us questions. We'd love to take your questions as well. And if you like what you hear, please share. If you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter at Darshan Talks, or just go to our website at darshantalks.com. Our podcast today, our live stream today, is about clinical research. And ideally, we want to get a little bit into the topic of diversity. So diversity and inclusion, to be more specific. So if you are in clinical research, you probably will care about today's discussion because it reflects some of the growing concerns that the FDA has in terms of what is actually being reflected in our study populations. What's interesting also is the census, I believe, came up with some numbers yesterday or day before. So this is very, very topical because they came back and said that it's for the first time in history, the U.S. population is not showing the same type of growth in white Anglo-Saxon individuals as to other groups. So the number of minorities are growing. I haven't looked into the numbers, but I think it was just an interesting headline. So our guest for today is a clinical trial manager. We aren't going to mention her place of work. She works at a sponsor. So that's the perspective she's going to bring. However, she is an expert in all things clinical research, an expert in all things law. Just everything expert.
It's everything.
So, ladies and gentlemen, our guest for today, Eunice Aikins-Afful. Hey, Eunice, how are you? Good to see you.
I'm well. Thank you for having me back. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. It's been a busy week already, and I'm already excited to be here. And let's sort of get into it a little bit because your sponsor, and we're gonna keep them nameless just to keep it that way. We're talking about Friday. We're talking right now about the Delta variant sort of going up and the numbers going up, and that's causing people to say, well, maybe we need to take additional precautions. How is that impacting the type of clinical research you're doing? And is that affecting, for example, monitoring visits or anything like that?
Yeah, so I'll address those in reverse order. So with monitoring visits, it depends on the facility. And so what we find is that if you're, large hospital X and you're an academic medical center in, town A, you may choose to restrict your population only to patients and one caregiver. And so that may be it. And so a monitor may not be able to get into that facility to see the data in real time and in person. But what we found is that, again, it's been 18 months now. So many folks have found adaptations to, we can have the monitor can have access to this data. The monitor can sign and say that confidentiality will not be breached because they've looked at this or looked at that, and then they might get a temporary access to, say, an electronic medical record, so that they can compare what they would have seen if they had been there. And so, again, it absolutely depends on the facility, and it absolutely depends on the country. So again, some countries will say, no problem, monitor can come on site. We are happy to do that. That's what we planned for, and that's what is available. But again, in the U.S. thus far, we've seen a lot of places say, no, thank you, not yet.
I love that. No, thank you, not yet. But I feel like that is for many sites who are unprepared, that is the
Yes.
dream scenario. I'm legally prohibited from letting you come on site. Uh,
Yes.
I mean, have you seen an impact? And again, we're not obviously using actual numbers; it's more experience. But have you
Sure.
seen an impact from a FDA perspective in terms of audits? Are they decreasing? Or are they doing it more remote type audits?
So interestingly enough, they are doing them remotely. And so again, I think we talked about this last time. Typically an audit is it'll be it's like a spot check. It's not something that happens to a site on a regular basis. But going back to our example of a large medical center, if I've been in business since 1845, and I'm at this academic medical center, some part of this hospital is getting audited every year because we have every specialty. So again, I may not know about it because I'm in specialty X, but the folks in specialty A absolutely got audited last year. But that information is going to be available in our regulatory department. So when a sponsor or a CRO comes to us and says, "Have you been audited by the FDA?" Yes, and these were the findings. This was our resolution X. So it's absolutely still happening, but they're doing it. They're doing it off campus. And so making those records available, it's fine if you're, say, May of 2020, but if it's September of 2021, you need to come up with a plan.
And that's, I guess that's part of the question, right? So do you find that the quality of the audit has been affected because you can't physically see the records, or do you see that we're mostly digital anyway, so it doesn't really change that much?
So again, it depends on the resources of the institution. And again, I want to step away from the word audit and switch to monitoring, because
Monitoring.
again, no worries, because again, that's what we would be looking for as a sponsor is, we need to see that every patient has signed consent. There's no reason that that can't be electronic or scanned or made available to us. It might be something as base level as, we're exchanging here and I'm showing and I'm holding up the piece of paper and you, the monitor, can now see the patient has consented. This is not some fake document. Here we are. And again, when and if you're available to come on site, you'll then see that. You wouldn't want to necessarily transfer that record because it has a patient's name on it. But again, if there's a secure system that's available, that might be one way of doing it. But again, it might be as simple as holding it up in front of a camera for the monitors to see, again, at the most basic of levels. But again, if the medical center has an availability with which they can say, "Oh no, here's our digital record, here's our digital EMR." I know some places they didn't have paper records for years, and so they're completely ready for this. And again, I think part of that is as people expand, as people become more savvy, it allows you to do more things. If all of the information is available, again, if the doctor needs it, let's say he wants to check on his patient, he can just log in and get it. Well, that makes life significantly easier if there's an emergency or something like this. Well, pivoting that from there so that the information can be monitored is easy.
But do you find in those types of scenarios
Mm-hmm.
that the site is now investing a lot more time into these audits as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to, here's a bunch of files, let me know if you need anything more?
Well, they shouldn't have been doing that anyway, but we'd like to think that per our contract, you have set aside a designated amount of time for the coordinator to sit with the monitor. Um, we'd like to think that that happens all of the time, but I don't know that it takes more time because, again, the person is still going through the record. The person is still, creating and asking questions. But again, if I've been looking at it online or if I've been watching what has been posted in the electronic data capture, I'm looking for queries already anyway. And I'm looking for things. Did you resolve this? Was this, visit entered? Does the drug that was dispensed match the date of the clinical visit? And so those are things that, as the monitor, I've been looking for anyway. And again, those systems are already electronic and have been for years. So that part's great. It's just when you talk about, is there a shadow chart? Is there a second record that's actually being kept that's, for God help you, paper for some reason? If that's actually happening, then that does make it that much harder. But again, there's ways to make it secure so that the person can log into it but not extract, and they can log into it and then not download. So that makes it a little bit easier. But again, it depends on the technology available at the site. It depends on how savvy they are. But if they've been selected for research, they probably had, many of these opportunities and gadgets, for lack of a better word, things to make it easier for them to be selected.
So that makes sense for, like you said, the large academic medical
Mm-hmm.
centers who've been around forever. But
Sure.
as you know, there's a constant recycling, for lack of a better term. I'm actually
Yeah.
not thinking of the right word, but
Yeah.
refreshing. There you go. Maybe that's the word, of new PIs coming in, new
Sure.
sites coming on.
Sure.
And they're going, what can I start with to know if I actually
Mm-hmm.
like this business, and I'll invest more over time.
Mm-hmm.
Are you finding that those are not typically the ones that start with cancer or oncology, and therefore they build up somewhere else and then eventually come? Or do you find that they come into oncology and they're like, this got really quick?
I think it depends on where they start.
Okay.
So, if I'm at again, no named large institution in Philadelphia, the likelihood is the patient's coming to your facility expecting to be in a research trial. They are fully expecting to be part of whatever's going to happen. Again, you always explain this may not benefit you, but we may learn from your results. The benefits are not guaranteed, those kinds of things. But if they're still willing to do it, they've chosen your facility. Again, if you're in a city that has multiple cancer centers, the likelihood is there's no reason that they can't pick someplace else. But they've chosen you because they expect to be in research. And so, if you're the new physician and you're privileged enough to be starting at this place, then the likelihood is you've also been taught and been trained. And again, the larger the facility, you will be specifically trained on this is what the expectation is. This is how you create a note. This is how you do all of the things that make you a good investigator. You'll get those opportunities early. And if you're lucky, you'll get a mentor who's interested in your success.
So that really raises the question. We're talking about how individuals get trained, which is awesome, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But I feel like in many ways we're changing the rules around who should be trained and what
Okay.
they should be trained for. And what I'm
Okay.
referring to is this new goal, and this is sort of where we originally started from, which is this new idea that diversity is important, that we want to see that reflected in study populations.
Sure.
Do you think sites are making the effort that's required to represent the populations they may be treating, or do you think that cancer happens to all people, and it's hard enough to get people to be part of these studies, and then narrowing down based on diversity will take away from the efforts of actual recruitment?
So luckily, as a sponsor, we leave it to the sites to decide who's involved. But if your cancer center is in, East Baltimore, for example, there's a strong likelihood that you're going to get a strong population of African American folks because that's where you are. If you're by that same token in Owings Mills, Maryland, maybe not. So it really depends on where you are and what outreach is available and how you're trying to gather your patients. I know that, at some centers they've taken, true efforts to make this happen. And so they may have community folks go out to churches or the YMCA or these kinds of things and then talk about, did you know that this is what clinical research is? Did you know that this is how you can participate? We're taking your blood, but we're not doing this. We're giving you, just going over what types of things that people can expect and what it leads to. Because I think the other thing is we talk about things, we assume people know what we're talking about, and then we never give them the results. We never tell them what happened with what they
Yeah.
did. And they're so otherwise interested. This is why I participated. What happened? What happened? It's like when you take, you get to a jury trial and then they settle. The juries listen to the entire thing and they don't know how it comes out. They're like, wait, I'm invested in this. Tell me what happened. It's the same for our trial patients. Especially if a patient is not on an oncology trial, they really want to know what have I contributed to what's happening and what's the outcome? And I think that if we can partner with community organizers and leaders and groups that are interested in these types of works, you then get that continuity because they can say, oh, well, I trust Darshan. He works in our community. We know that he's not going to lead us astray. He's going to tell us straight up what's the deal. And so if they feel like they have someone that they can ask that's outside of that medical realm, they may feel more comfortable participating in the medical realm. So it's not an easy answer. It's beyond an easy fix. But I think that as we're having more of the conversations, there is an impetus to do that. But I also think it also goes back to opportunity, and I think of it from way back, right? So if you continue to have opportunities where all children are being exposed to education, all children are getting the opportunity to go to decent schools, and all children are being given the opportunity for STEM, and all children are then leading from STEM programs to medical schools, all of a sudden you have kids that look like all people, and they're not just children now, they're people that are encouraging people that look like them to be in the clinical trials because they are reflecting the community.
It's interesting. So we have a comment from Janan saying social determinants of health are absolutely barriers to why people volunteer. I've seen the use of social determinants of health mostly being used in the context of healthcare. There's a whole argument, as you know, in clinical research where we go, we're not healthcare because we're not treating you. But do you find that social determinants of health are having a major impact? And you've sort of highlighted a couple of them, but as a sponsor, when you get into these conversations, do you talk to people and go, look, we need to adjust for this so that we have a clear representation? That might mean if you're choosing between 15 sites, we want sites that have access to a more diverse population. Is that a conversation that happens, or how does that play out?
Yes, and so that absolutely can happen, and you do want to look at, there's so many factors that will go into a site. So for example, how much experience a physician has, where the site is, and how easy it is for them to have all of the tests that you need to have performed and so forth. But then once you drill down for that and everything's equal, it's easier to then say, we'd like to work with Dr. Aikins-Afful instead of Dr. Kulkarni because, and then you can move it from there. But very many times very many times you'll find that it revolves around the investigator. And so I'm seeing Janan's point about what would you do if you say that somebody had time to volunteer. I understand that, and that is real. That is absolutely real, and it may not even be a level of from a clinical trial standpoint. When I lived in Memphis, one of the bigger things that we were able to do through one of the organizations locally was we were able to raise money for a mammography van. Well, if you can imagine the van coming to your place of work, instead of you now needing to drive, 2 hours. Again, you might have childcare responsibilities. You might be paid by the hour, and instead of having to travel that distance and then worry about all the other things outside of your life, you can walk outside your workplace and get a mammogram and decide and find out if you're okay. That's huge. That's huge. And again, if it's organized and carefully planned, that takes away some of that barrier for somebody even participating, again, not in a trend or trial, in their own care. Because again, we find that women are more likely to defer their own care for the needs of their family, when in fact, if they aren't healthy, they can't take care of their families. So it's definitely a double-edged sword, but that's just one of the solutions that I've seen in the community.
So it's interesting. You made a comment, and I want to explore that a little bit more. What you said was the decision of choosing the site often also pivots on the PI themselves. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So if you're trying to do, and again, I'll use the mammography example again. If you're trying to do a trial in breast cancer, going to a liver specialist is the wrong way to go. So you want to make sure that you're starting at the baseline. Do you treat those patients? Is that the best way to do it? And then you'll say, okay, well, how long have you been treating those patients? So we'll look at the CV. As part of the sponsor's role of oversight, we have to make sure that you're trained in what it is that we need you to do. So that, again, it's not just a funnel for giving you money excessively. You actually know what you're working on. You actually are trained. We have a CV to back up the fact that you know what you're doing. And then you'll go from there to say, all right, okay, so you do treat the disease specialty that we're interested in. You do have research experience in doing it. You do have the facilities and availability to do that. And now all of a sudden, it's like, okay, what does your population look like? And we can ask you that. We can say, tell us who you've treated, because you do know the answer to that, because you had to capture it. So, share that data with us. Tell us, how many of these studies, because you may also say, again, you did 10 studies last year. How many patients did you actually enroll? What did they look like? Were they men? Were they women? How were they selected? You have the right to ask those questions. And again, if someone's not willing to share that information, you probably don't want to work with them, because that's the most basic thing. But that opportunity is definitely there to look at, who those folks are. And with so many things available on the internet, you can kind of even, figure out if it's true. If somebody's telling you something, you obviously want to give them the benefit of the doubt that the integrity that they're sharing is real. But you also want to, you want to do your own due diligence.
And we definitely need to talk a little bit about how you do the due diligence. But before we get into that, one of the questions that I want to ask about the PIs, the reason I asked that question is there's always this discussion about are the PIs being recruited because they are the appropriate physicians, which in most cases they are, or is it because they're key opinion leaders and you want them on the write-up, on the medical writing that happens at the end? Is that, and again, I don't mean in your specific company, but in general, do you see that being a actual consideration, or has the Sunshine Act really handled that for the most part?
I have never seen that in any place I've worked. And I'm proud to say that. In no place have I worked have we said, oh, we absolutely want Dr. Kulkarni's name on this paper, so even if he doesn't enroll a patient, he'll get to be involved in the write-up, because we've then spent money on you, so starting up your clinical trial and all the pieces that come with that, all of the parts that go through it, and you don't even so much as screen a patient, that's energy and time lost that I had to pay the CRO to work with you to get all of the correct, the correct documents and so forth. So it's just, whoa, that's a long way to go, for one guy's name on or one gal's name on a piece of paper, as opposed to I can get somebody who's actually going to create, who's actually going to recruit patients to write the paper. So they may have more experience and have more to contribute because they actually worked on the study.
So it's interesting you say that, though, but because we've both heard, we've all heard of what are called seeding trials, and the idea of a seeding trial is, as I know but for the people who are listening in, is that the company is really hoping that you'll use the product, get used to the product, and then hopefully be an advocate for the product in the future.
Sure.
So it's not like companies aren't cognizant of the fact that they are fighting in a crowded marketplace, and unless your drug is a complete game changer, you still have to worry about the competition out there. So yes, maybe it costs you a little bit more to get Dr. X to be part of the study, but in the long term, it's worth it because I don't have to do a seeding trial because now he or she's already part of the process. But that feels a little bit to me, as I say, even as I say that, it feels a little bit to me like almost the DOJ's perspective, and again, speaking for the DOJ, but I don't work for the DOJ or anything like that. But the DOJ's perspective of sort of Monday morning quarterbacking a little bit and going back and going, well, is that what you really thought? And you didn't put it down, but that was the actual intention. Tell me more about reality. How does that actually work in reality?
So I want to make sure that I understood the question. And so we're saying that, if you're, so if we're planting, this physician, physician X into the discussion by making them part of it, so that we can then sell more of those because physician X is so popular. That's not the research side, right? So that's the drug's on the market at that point, so absolutely, it's like we really want Dr. Y to tout this and use it and love it, but it's also available to be sold. When you're in research, it's a little bit further back in that process, and so I can see the argument for doing so, and definitely, sure, you want Dr. So and so to promote your thing, but again, if something's not available, no matter how much influence that person has, that doesn't help you because physicians won't have access to it.
I think that's absolutely fascinating. I do have one more comment from Janan.
Sure.
Don't know if you can read this, but I'll read it out for those people who are not
sure.
seeing this. Sorry for the long one. I'm currently researching breast cancer patients, many of whom are Black women, and new potential oral therapies that are out there for stage 4 treatment. Because these patients are less likely to get screened, they're ideal candidates. But as a pharmacist, I struggle to recommend these stage 4 options because the CRO studied most of these meds in a minority of Black patients. So what her position, and I'm putting into words, I'm summarizing, and I could be inaccurate about the summary, but her position is that as a pharmacist, how do I recommend a product that has not been adequately studied in the population? And as a sponsor, this is coming from a practicing pharmacist. How do you address that proactively at the only time you can, which is when you're doing the research? Or do you wait for a phase 4 and go, that's when I'm going to try to manage this?
So unfortunately, you can't pick who gets cancer. You can't say, well, we really want all of these folks. To Janan's own point, we don't always get the representation for people to participate in the study. So maybe these were the only folks that we had available. That said, I would like to think that on some level, and again, as pharmacists, you guys would know better than I, that on some level, the histology is going to be the same because it's still breast tissue. And so absolutely, you don't necessarily know how this population is going to react. But we're not necessarily talking about something that's, like sickle cell, that's specifically going to target one population or another. Breast tissue is pretty similar. And again, I'm not suggesting that she do her own, trial to see how things would pan out. But it is a bit concerning to say, gosh, how do we effectuate that? I don't know the right answer. I truly don't. I can only say that, if she does happen to know that there were only a few patients that looked like the patients that she's now seeing, I would ask how they fared.
The thing is, how do you know how they fared compared to how they could have fared? And that's a much harder thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, she's not wrong. I mean, this is something that all of us struggle with. I was talking to someone recently who was saying that she works at a CRO, and and again, they're trying to make a push towards diversity and inclusion, and so they had brought in a specialist to have the conversation with them about, these are the reasons that you want to make sure that patients are treated ethically, and here's another way of doing that, and we can try this, we can try that, we can do this. And she said she was learning so very much, and it's startling to hear about some of the things that have happened to folks in the past. That said, how do I, sitting here today as a person, make that better? I don't know that I have the power to, but we can try.
Very, very interesting.
But we can try.
We as you can tell, we can keep going. This is always a fun conversation. But we're, as I promised, we're about 15 minutes over time, which is always
okay.
But that's because you're just a fascinating conversationalist. Let's talk a little bit about you. So based on what we've discussed, what is something you'd like to ask the audience?
Oh gosh, I still want to know more about who is participating in telemedicine. Because again, we talk about the technology and we talk about the things that are available to folks, but let's say I have, I need to see a dermatologist. I may not want to use the computer at the library to have that conversation. So is there a way that I can do that on my device? Is there a way that I can do that privately if I don't have access, and what are some of the other ways that are doing it? I found that because of COVID, so many more people have had access to physicians because of the availability. And I know that at some point, I want to say maybe June or July, the transferring between the licensing. So if I have a license in Massachusetts, can I practice in New York? The COVID exception has kind of passed, but maybe I wanted to continue seeing that person. Or maybe there's, because again, the availability, there's only so many physicians. Lord knows we need nurses. We've had a nursing shortage since I was born. So, we constantly need people in the fray, and we constantly need physicians, because to your point, as people are aging out and new folks are coming in, how are they being trained? How are they being schooled? What's being offered? Those are things they're again, they're not easy questions or answers, but but I know that a lot of folks are in it for the right reasons.
So I'm going to try to answer the question for you based on my experience. Then,
please,
Janan wants to answer that. She's welcome to as well, and anyone else who's listening. But the question you asked was how, if at all, are people using telemedicine? My experience with telemedicine, I'm not specifically talking about research a second, but I'm talking about telemedicine in general. Is that, and I think that I would have the same exact question if I was doing this in research, is what is this going to cost me? And it's really unclear. All I hear about is telemedicine is problematic from a payment standpoint. I can never tell whether my insurance is going to cover it or it's coming out of my pocket. I can never tell whether, if it's a clinical trial, I'm looking at some of these agreements and I'm seeing in there, you might be billed for some of this and you may not be billed for this other stuff. And I'm kind of going, it's a clinical trial. No, you as the sponsor are picking up the tab.
Sure.
But it's in the contract saying, no, we're going to be splitting this up. Which again, there are legitimate reasons absolutely for doing that, but it's a harder sell as a patient, as a potential subject going, do I want to go down this path? So to me, telemedicine has loads of opportunities, but I think that there is, they really need to get the message down is really what I think it is.
Yes, so, that's fair. That's fair. Thank you.
So that's one. So my second question to you, what is something you've learned in the last month that people might be interested in?
Oh, gosh. That, no, unfortunately, this is not a new thought. So I will, caveat there. But that we can do better. We can do better about being patient with each other as far as, what people are comfortable with. There's been a lot of talk surrounding the NFL because people are saying, oh, well, I want more data regarding, whether or not I should have the vaccine. And so, of course, all the talk shows have picked this up because, this player is doing this and this player is doing that. And I think that I had no reason to know that the NFL has changed the ruling. And so whereas last year they would reschedule games, if, say, for example, your star quarterback has COVID and can't play, and for whatever reason your team is down, you're about to forfeit that game. And because the players did not play, they will not get paid. So that is what I've learned in the last month. So that is a big deal.
That's really interesting.
It changes the conversation. It completely changes the conversation on vaccinations.
Huh.
So again, if I'm Vegas, I just found a big hole in what I'll be, what the lines are going to be.
Wow. I love that one. That's a really good, interesting take. I'll sort of give you one myself that I heard that I thought was very interesting. I think I may have mentioned on the podcast, but I just read somewhere that people were not getting vaccinated, especially in the South, as you know. And that seemed to be from different explanations or whatever it is out there. What I read was they got 100,000 people to get vaccinated the moment they created a vaccine lottery, and the idea was that people like to play the lottery, and if you get vaccinated, you get to play, and that caused 100,000 more people to get vaccinated. Similarly, apparently Amazon apparently has some kind of vaccination lottery as well that you can win products from Amazon.
Holy smokes!
So vaccination has led to some really patient-centric approaches.
Yes. So. It's fascinating. And like I said, no matter what side of the argument you're on, everybody is focused on the NFL. It's the most popular, thing in our entire country. And so for that to be a thing, so again, imagine you're CBS and you were completely expecting to broadcast this game, and now one of the teams can't participate. what did you just pay for? And what are you going to put on instead? So it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. So yeah,
I wonder if you
it's
almost
very
hope
interesting.
for it. I wonder if you're like a upcoming TV show, if you almost hope for the NFL going out, because then you're coming onto that slot.
Hard Knocks is going to take a turn.
Exactly. I don't even watch enough regular TV to know. I'm watching everything on Netflix and the like. But anyway, and my last question to you is: what is something that's made you happy in the last week?
Oh gosh, getting to see friends.
Very cool.
Getting to see friends, because again, this COVID has made life a little more challenging. And, how do you have a barbecue or have a dinner or have people? And, well, it's still possible. And I was able to do that. So it was great. Thank you for asking.
Of course. And if people want to reach out to Eunice, you can just find her on LinkedIn at Aikins-2 on LinkedIn. But it's out there. You should be able to access it. I'll also put it into the comments so people can access it as well. But Eunice, this was wonderful, and thank you so much for coming on. I do hope
you for having me
back again.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. I absolutely will.
Take care.
Bye now.